On today's episode is Gagan Sandhu. He is the Senior Engineering Director at Square. We're going to discuss machine learning, reality versus expectations, and also mentoring, how to help aspiring leaders with different career advice and mentoring advice. Enjoy the episode. Gagan, thanks for joining. Feel free to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Suraj. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast with you. A little bit about myself. I'm currently at Square for the last 3.5 years, and I lead machine learning, engineering, data engineering, mobile engineering, as well as full stack teams within the e-commerce product division of Square. And I've been in the data world for a decade and a half and in engineering world for almost 2 decades. And the journey has been interesting. I've started in the data world 15 years ago as business analytics, business intelligence, and slowly, built the teams to master that. And as the problems evolved and as the volume of data evolved over time in the last 15 years, and I should say not even evolved, but exploded, my skills expanded with that. And now, about 5 years ago is when I started venturing into machine learning. And in this time, I've now built teams from scratch and learned a ton about machine learning engineering. And also just by being in the software engineering world, there's been a lot of learning and a lot of growth for me personally in building teams, whether they're remote, whether they're distributed, whether they're consisting of a lot of ICs and some managers, mentoring engineers to become leaders. So I'm happy to talk about all aspects of that.
Awesome. Yeah, you have an extensive background. I know there's a lot of good stuff to get to. Let's just dive right into it. I know, machine learning, it's that kind of, dangling carrot in front of executives. And it's still somewhat of a buzzword. I think maybe 5-10 years ago was extremely, like, hey, are robots going to take over, humans sort of thing, that kind of notion. With more practicality coming into play now, I guess let's start with your overall kind of reality versus expectations. I know it's a tough thing to get both of those to be eye to eye. So I guess where do you see things right now? And then where do you see the expectations just with machine learning capabilities going?
So broadly speaking, there are, I would say, 2 broad categories of machine learning software engineering part. And one is when your product, you are a company or a team whose end product is really about machine learning. You see some companies out there, they build chatbots, they build fault detection systems or defect identification systems. So when your core product is machine learning, that's one category. Or I should say, when your core product is driven by machine learning algorithms, that's one category. And then there is everything else where you can employ machine learning to improve your product, your customer experience, your employee productivity. And I would say the vast majority of machine learning actually falls in the second category. The problem I see is sometimes people who are in the second category think that they're going to apply some machine learning magical algorithm and their product is going to vault from whatever it is today to the next generation. Or they will build a product, anew and rebuild it with machine learning, and all of a sudden their product would be this, absolutely a killer product, killer app. And I have seen more disappointment in the second category, and especially with those people who think that, the product will be revolutionized. The way I see it and the way I have experienced it, machine learning brings an edge to a product that has already created a market for itself, already created a niche for itself. And it's able to stand, as I like to say, on its 2 feet. Your product, whatever company or team or organization you are, your product has to first find the market fit. It has to be acceptable to the users. It has to delight the users. And then when you run into some friction areas, you can employ machine learning to reduce the friction in those areas.
It sounds like setting the expectation starts with already having a framework of something in place that's working. So I think the improvement aspect of what machine learning can do is maybe how you and or folks have to go about it to set that expectation. Is that safe to say? It sounds like having that ability to improve and make those adjustments, but without having that baseline of something credible already, the expectation of machine learning is just out of whack.
Yes, precisely. I think expectations do get out of whack very quickly, especially if there is too much chatter around that, because people sometimes get a little bit too excited about things that can be. And I'm not saying that are not possible at all, but a lot of things have to happen before that, before you can say, now let's apply machine learning and make, take, like, if your product is 80% there, you can apply machine learning to get the rest 15% and make it even more persuasive for your customers to try that product, to use that product. And I'll take an example. For instance, when within Square, we were looking at improving our customer support experience for our customers and for our agents. And what we found was, one thing is, we did have a customer support. So we couldn't just build a machine learning driven customer support chatbot and say, voila, we solved the problem. No, we did have a customer support team that was good at and had the contextual knowledge to solve customers' problems. But we came in and we thought that we can actually help them be even more efficient. So what we did was we started collecting data, started collecting the friction points, and our machine learning engineers within weeks were able to pinpoint things that we can do to improve the experience, both for customers, and if we actually are able to satisfy customers better with a machine learning algorithm, then our customer service agents can actually focus on more, tricky problems that, our customers have unique problems. So that's what I meant which was, if I had pitched to my, senior leaders in the company and said, we should just get rid of customer support and this ML algorithm was going to take care of everything, I think that I do see some of those conversations happen in the industry. And I think that is where the expectations go totally out of whack. But always going with, hey, we will improve things marginally at first, learn from it, iterate from it, and then either go to the other areas or go deeper into that same area and do even more, delightful work for the customers.
Yeah, it sounds like you can't sell that pie in the sky solution quite yet. And so you got to start small. I guess getting that buy-in from executives, it sounds like your strategy is to definitely show improvement based on what's there and have the team be able to kind of set up that roadmap. So I guess, how do you go from executives, they know all these things about machine learning from a high level, and they think you guys can come in and do those things. How do you then break down that roadmap to maybe get to that point where you guys can have some, chatbots that are alleviating some of the, headcount and stuff like that? Because you got to think that's where executives want things to go to allow the technology to help reduce, overhead and cost. So how do you kind of manage that and go about getting the buy-in from executives?
One is being realistic. And I think the flip side of being realistic is, and for not promising the pie in the sky, is sometimes these conversations are a bit harder, because it's easy to sell a huge dream. But if you're saying, listen, if I were to go and pitch, we will be able to get rid of the entire customer support team by next year, that's very compelling. That's a huge dollar sign. But if I say we will be able to reduce the growth of the team, that's a much different argument. But I think it's through my own years of experience and also by learning and talking to peers in the industry, I feel like setting expectations, clearer expectations earlier in the process is actually a recipe for success. And the way to do it is then to work with the right stakeholders. For instance, if this is going to be about customer support, talking to the people who lead customer support and who actually have to, keep the churn in, like if they have to grow the team 30%, customer support might have to hire at 50% rate because the churn is high. But if we say, hey, listen, we can bring that growth from 30% in number of agents to say 15%. Now, all of a sudden, they only have to hire 20% more people, even including the churn. And if we factor in that, we will also help the agents become more satisfied at their job because they will be actually solving deeper problems, tougher problems with the customers, so their engagement would improve. So that's the other thing. But again, the proof is in the pudding. That's why I like to start small and do a small project. We call them discovery projects, and show some value there. And then have a follow-up conversation and say, this is what we are talking about.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I think you have to collaborate effectively to get a project to a good point where it actually can, provide some value. I guess it sounds like you see folks trying to do things in silos then, I guess, when it comes to, machine learning projects. Is that safe to say? I'm just curious, I think this is tackling a business problem, and you have, your background having an MBA, you're more trained to do that. Do you see folks in this space just really trying to use the technology and just not talking to other stakeholders? Is that what you're seeing in kind of when ML projects are not hitting the mark as much?
Yeah. So I think being an engineer myself and having worked in engineering for so long, but also going to business school and learning about different aspects of the business, I do get to see this almost a mindset difference at times where engineers, they always want to adopt the latest technology. And I think if you poll a number of engineers, upgrading the platform will come up as one of the top three priorities. It doesn't matter which technology it is, doesn't matter what platform they work on. It's always going to be, pay the technical debt, upgrade the platform. So my point is, engineers always want to be at the leading or the bleeding edge of technology. And business overall thinks about where do we add most value, which customer problem we solve, which employee problem we solve, which productivity or operational problem we solve. And it's always, I would say it's a never ending discussion, but in a positive way, not never ending that nobody understands. But this is something that you always have to keep discussing and keep reinforcing because, the newest algorithm that comes in ML is going to solve world hunger, right? That's always the promise. That's always how everybody reacts to it. But then my goal always is to take the ML engineers into the discussions where we talk about the trade-offs. Yes, we can actually launch this algorithm. It's going to be really cool, but if only 0.3% of the users are going to benefit from it, is it really worth doing it? Is the cost benefit analysis, really in our favor or not? And that's where I think, a lot of time, and as I said, it's not a one and done. These conversations need to happen all the time. And I think for ML engineers, they almost have to be more business savvy than a typical engineer who's working on front end and back end, because no ML engineering decisions are made in vacuum where it's like, it's just about technology, implement it and get out of the way. Because ML brings many, many teams together. ML projects are never done in vacuum. And so inherently the costs are very high. So for the engineers, it's super critical to understand the costs and the value and actually have a good way to balance those.
It sounds like for you communicating with your team, is that a focal point then for you to make sure you're giving them the business drivers behind the work that they're doing to keep them focused and also, kind of make sure, they're not losing sight of kind of what that focus needs to be?
Yeah. And part of this mechanism is working out the success metrics before we jump into a project, which is if we say, listen, we are going to improve this product creation experience for the customer. Like, we are Square builds tools for people to sell online and online or in person. So for sell online, we were thinking of improving the experience. When a customer creates, let's say a food truck, they'll say taco. And what we found was if you just say a taco and there isn't much description, the sales can be improved by saying it's steak taco with cilantro and our special sauce and all that. So the machine learning engineers on the team dug deep and found out the correlation on description and how well things sell. So we were able to show that this can have positive effect. But how much positive is something we had to define before we jumped into the product. Because again, as I said, 5, 6 teams are going to come together and implement this. But what should success look like? And then creating dashboards while we were creating these algorithms and implementing them, we created dashboards to measure our success. Is it meaningfully moving the needle, or are we just, basically just,
floating around?
yeah, floating around and pushing code out for the sake of pushing code out? And I think that after you do it like 2 or 3 or 4 times, I think it does become a habit to start thinking about the end result first and measure the end result as we move forward with the project.
And I guess for your team, when they're seeing those dashboards, I was curious kind of the reactions they get, like, are they, okay, the work I'm doing is going towards the end goal. Do you see that really then impacting their involvement just from maybe just a, happiness perspective of what they're doing with their work? Because a lot of times I feel like that's where there's a disconnect. And it sounds like these kind of things, obviously it's great from a business perspective, but also for the team, it just allows them to really kind of see where they're making impact and visually kind of see the difference that they're making a lot quicker than waiting for a product to get to an end result or a launch.
Yeah. I think in this area, machine learning engineers are kind of blessed in the sense that typically they are asked to prove what the value is. For a lot of other engineering disciplines, you're asked to do a project and be done with it. And then you move on to the next project. A lot of times, engineers in other disciplines, they're like, I don't know what value I added, because typically they're moving on to the next things. But for ML engineers, typically, at least when I worked on ML projects, creating those metrics and dashboards actually falls squarely with ML engineering and the analysts who work with them. And to answer your question, they are actually part of the journey of creating the success metrics in the first place. And secondly, when you asked about this, I think about the satisfaction, it's tremendous. When you see, and I think it's true for all engineers, and I would say, most people, is when what you did adds value and you can actually measure it, it's tremendously satisfying. And on the other hand, if it doesn't add value, you can see it and say, well, we had a hypothesis, we went ahead with it, but it's not yielding results. Let's go back and dig in. So yes, I have found it tremendously satisfying. And it's not just ML engineers, but everyone working on the project. Because if you see here, listen, we actually improved customer support efficiency by 18%. That's huge, right? That's huge. You can quickly extrapolate that and say it results in X dollars or X number of more satisfied customers. And that's tremendously rewarding.
Yeah, no, I mean, getting the team to buy in to kind of the end result. And it sounds like a lot of your philosophy is to work backwards, kind of have that North Star and then let that dictate everything and also kind of bring in everybody. So I was curious, getting into kind of mentorship and advice, I guess, looking at machine learning engineers, I mean, are there a couple of things that you think overall, folks that are in that space, what can they do to keep improving?
Oh, great question. I think just like any other engineering discipline, machine learning engineers come in all shapes and forms and colors and hues. There are people who are very good at technology and they think technology alone will solve the problem. And then there are people who come in and from, let's say, an analytics background, and they're very good with numbers. And so it's a mix. But overall, I would say as a leader, I have employed different strategies for different people and at different stages of their career. Somebody we hired right out of school with a PhD, the mentoring sessions with them were much more different because they had to understand, what was important for the company, how the things that they can work on, how do they align with the vision of the company, because they were trying to carve a space for themselves. So they needed to see, how they would add value and where they should add value. Whereas on the other hand, there was one engineer who was superb at back end and front end and, ML, every technology. And their goal was to just go and build ML in every part of the company. And with them, the mentoring was more around, we need to pick which pieces we are going to build. And we can't just boil the ocean. We can't just talk to everyone and say, we'll do this for you and for you and for you and for you. So it's been different, but at the same time, I do want to say that for ML, there are some patterns that are now available and out in the open, but it's still a newer area. It's not as, I would say baked as some of the other engineering disciplines are. So it's a little bit fluid overall. And still, people coming in also in ML, I think there is a disproportionate number as compared to other engineering discipline of people coming in with PhDs. So you already have people who come in with a lot of academic experience, and their view of the world is very different, and they are very thoughtful and methodical. Sometimes you have to say, okay, now we're not in academia. We don't have 2 years to solve a problem.
This is the real world. We got to do a lot quicker.
Right. I mean, so there is that part as well where you have to bring them and say, okay, we'll do the research for 2 weeks and then we will regroup. So it's much different from where they come from. So my point is there is a variety of ML engineers, and also, some people come from just working their way up through product engineering and the backend engineering. Some people come with PhDs. And so it's been, I would say, very interesting, and for me personally, very rewarding to bring everyone into the same boat and say, this is where we're going.
Yeah, I think the best coaches take what they have and work with it. I think, this is not a cookie cutter type of situation where you can just apply the same kind of coaching or mentorship to each person. And it sounds like that's your approach. You kind of view the person's background, their experience, and then based on that, with them kind of determine what they need to do to improve. And then kind of that then allows them to keep, kind of moving up in their career.
Absolutely.
No, it makes sense. I guess something that's pretty relevant right now with, everybody for the most part still being remote. How has that impacted kind of how you manage people, and what are you doing to maintain as much, that feel like you're in the office, but you're not?
Wow, it's been 6+ months now that we've been remote. It's pretty amazing. And the fact that the world hasn't blown up in terms of like our professional working world, I think it's a testament that we all evolved. But one of the things that I learned early on, so I've managed distributed teams. So, teams, many, many time zones apart. And one of the key things that I push for is building trust, so that it should never feel like, power is concentrated and people in certain location are trusted. And having a lot of experience with that through managing distributed teams also helped me deal with, all of a sudden everybody going remote. And I think a couple of adjustments that we had to make was, even though we trust, I felt like there was something so I'll take example of one of the teams that I lead. That team, we did a survey 3 weeks out after the remote work started, and that team's morale was really low. And I dug a little bit deeper, and I figured that that team had no rituals now that everybody was remote. All the rituals were when everybody was in the office. The team would actually go for lunch together. And after lunch at around 3 p.m., everybody would go for coffee together. And every Thursday or Friday, there would be like an ad hoc happy hour. Now, all of that was gone. So what we did was we actually started a couple of rituals with that team, which was daily stand-up. And earlier, the stand-up was only via Slack. And I insisted that we bring everyone on video. And that actually became a really good thing for that team, because that stand-up became an open discussion and almost like a ritual where team could connect. We would talk about the work, but in between we would talk about everything else. So that's one thing. I think I would say improvisation by learning what each team needs. I think that helped. Another team was where one of the managers was not keen to be a manager anymore. So I'm like, well, if going remote and not having a vested manager is super critical when you're remote. So I had to make that change where, okay, I had to jump in and manage the team directly, because you can't have less engaged manager during these times, because we need almost extra engagement and extra, I would say, empathy for everyone. So I had to make that change. So it's been a lot of learnings, but overall, the trust level, always building the trust that I trust the work they do. I trust the way they do the work. And I trust when they bring any concerns. And I make myself available as well as responsible for not just listening, but solving the problems that we surface.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's kind of I think it sounds like to me at least the similar approach you take to an ML project was the same approach. It's you guys put out a survey, you got the data, and then based on that, you found the gaps, and then you were able to make the necessary adjustments to make everybody feel better about not being in the office. Now it'll be very interesting to see what happens if kind of there's a hybrid moving forward. But no, I agree. I think the best athletes, the best sports teams, they all have rituals. Even the best, whoever, if it's an entrepreneur, whatever the case is, there's habits that lead to success. And I think it's, making your bed is an enormous one that everybody talks about. So I think it's once you get into that habit, you become accustomed to it. And then in this case, it got taken away from everybody. And then it's like, well, nobody ever took the time to put it back in. And I think sounds like that's part of the remote strategy, is to make sure if anything has been replaced, how can we substitute now to get that same feel? I guess it's kind of like when you're on a diet, you don't want to just do away with sweets, but you still have to have a little bit. So making sure you kind of get what you need to keep that morale up is critical.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I've found is we just need more FaceTime now, because what used to be a 5-minute conversation in the kitchen or in the hallway about something, those opportunities are gone now. They just evaporated. So now I think, especially leaders, have to set up more time individually with people to get the, I call it almost the metadata about your teams, which is, to get a temperature. You just can't be in one team meeting and get a sense of everything. You need to set up more time. So I saw my calendar basically blow up after everybody went remote, because all those conversations, the 2-minute conversation here, a 5-minute there, and the ability to congregate everyone around one problem, all those opportunities were gone. So as you mentioned, they needed to be replaced with something else. And for me, and I think for a lot of leaders, and as I exchange notes with others in the company and outside, all the managers' calendars have just, gone ballistic about this, because no meeting can be 15 minutes. Every meeting has to be 30 minutes, and 30-minute meetings add up very, very quickly.
So I'm curious, with your calendar and other leaders' calendars getting blown up, the common sense answer would be, yes, my efficiency has decreased. I'm curious, do you feel that's been the case, or has the effectiveness of the team increased? Your kind of calendar has blown up, but I'm just curious how that dynamic has actually, in your opinion, impacted you and just overall success and whatnot.
So I think every manager I've spoken to, they've said the same thing, that I don't know if it's efficiency has increased or not, but in the beginning, especially, the work hours just increased. There was no way around it. And I think that was a decent trade-off, because for me personally, my commute to work was 90 minutes each way. So I could justify that. But that's hard to sustain day in and day out. And I think a lot of companies actually saw that broadly. And that's why, especially in the earlier months, a lot of companies gave time off almost to the entire company. Like, hey, team, just take the time off, because everybody was trying to make up for the lost productivity by not being in the office, by doing more. And also with nowhere to go, nobody was really taking time off, because, what are you going to do? There's nowhere to go and nothing to do. So you just work. So we all had to adjust. And I would say for me personally and people around me, it took about 3 to 4 months to find the balance. And I would say to reset, whether it's rituals and, our operations and everything, and things, I would say, got back to normal after about 4 months. So the calendars are not as blown up. Plus, there was so much uncertainty at the beginning. Are we going to hire or not hire? I had a couple of open positions. So like, okay, now, we just need to absorb all that work. And as conditions improved, and fortunately, especially for Square, we saw that things have improved enough that we resumed hiring, and that eased the pressure as well. I think the uncertainty in the earlier part was it caused a lot of anxiety, and we all came up with ways to deal with it. And that increased the amount of work and possibly took a hit on efficiency as well. But things have stabilized now. Like I don't feel dread anymore about anything work related.
That's very good. Seems like the new normal is now normal. So that's good. I guess kind of last question for you. What advice would you give to folks that are looking to become, directors or maybe they're managers? I know something that I hear a lot is, well, how do you manage this bigger scale now? You might be in one organization and you're looking to kind of move up the scale of engineering on its own and then the scale of expectations. Now you have more stakeholders or bigger stakeholders. How do you go about, or what would be the advice you would give to people? What are some things that have worked for you in that trajectory?
So one of the things I tell all engineers, and especially women engineers, is take on more responsibility. And even if you think you are not 100% ready, and this is especially to all the women engineers listening, because I give this advice to every woman engineer I work with and mentor, is you don't have to be 100% ready to take on more responsibility. It's okay to say, let me take this on. I might succeed or I might not, but let me take this on and run with it. And chances are no one would offer you an opportunity unless they have confidence in you. So a lot of times you having confidence in yourself and say, yes, I don't know everything about it, but I'm confident I can learn about it and succeed that way. I think that's important. Take on more responsibility. The other, I think it's common knowledge, but I'll say it, solving the problem. We are hired as engineers or leaders to solve the problems. So what I emphasize to everyone who wants to take on leadership role is you bring up, engineers typically very good at finding problems. That's just, we are by nature and nurture, we are very good at finding problems. And the best engineers and the best leaders will find the problems, find the solutions, and come back and say, I found a problem, I fixed it. And the scale of those problems keeps getting bigger and bigger. And when you're ready to step into the leadership role, and also the scope, it's not just a technical problem anymore. It becomes a technical and organizational and operational problem that you're trying to solve. So that's the second thing. The way I say it is, my boss should never have to worry about the problems that come in my area. They should only worry about, hey, here are the things we needed to do and we did them. And also here are the problems we encountered and we solved them. So almost like, my boss shouldn't have to worry about solving the problems in my area. That's one. Secondly is collaboration. I think, strong collaboration across all stakeholders. And as you grow, it's not just your team, it's your adjacent teams and people outside your org and in different roles. And I would say the other thing is having a clear vision. And what I've seen is everyone, and especially engineers, thrive on when they have a clear vision of what needs to be done, what they need to do. Because if you give a team a 1 year, 2 year vision, they can optimize their own workflows, their own work, their own thought processes to reach that goal. And if you give a 2 year goal, they'll probably reach in 15 months because they can optimize things. You cannot, as a leader, expect to plan everything out. But if you give them a clear vision, as I call it, the leader's intent, hey, we need to capture that mountain by, in 6 months. People are very good at, self-organizing and optimizing everything. So those are the three things I really would like everyone to take away from this.
Yeah, no, it sounds like going back to one of your original points, trust. You got to trust yourself, you got to trust your team, and you got to trust the plan. And knowing what problem you're trying to solve allows all of that rest of the kind of the trust umbrella to really then kind of make sense. And then you as a leader, your job is to connect those dots as smoothly as you can. And you really got to give to your team and make sure you're communicating constantly and kind of bringing everybody together to solve the problem. So simple things usually work. So it's great advice there.
Thank you.
Awesome. If somebody's interested to get in touch, I'm guessing LinkedIn, that'd be the best way to reach out to you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, everybody, hope you've enjoyed this episode. There were some great pieces of advice there. And until next time, we'll see you later.